The Library of Alexandria. You hear that name and picture a giant fire. You see centuries of knowledge turning to ash. It's always a sad story. It's a big loss for humanity. People say it threw us into the Dark Ages. They say we lost so much. But was it really that bad? I mean, was it really the end of the world for knowledge? I think we might have made too much of it. The real story is more complex. It's not one big fire. It's not one big tragedy. It's a lot of little things. And it happened over a long time. Imagine a place where all the world's books were kept. Imagine scholars from everywhere working together. They would read everything, they would translate everything, they would try to understand everything. That's the dream of the Library of Alexandria. It sounds amazing. It sounds like a perfect place for learning. And it was special, no doubt. It was a big deal in its time. The kings of Egypt, the Ptolemies, started it. This was after Alexander the Great died. They wanted their city, Alexandria, to be the center of the world. Not just for trade, but for brains, too. So, they built this huge complex. It wasn't just one library. It was more like a research center. There was the Great Library, yes, but there was also the daughter library. That was in a temple called the Serapeum, and there were places for scholars to live, places for them to eat, lecture halls, even an observatory. It was like a university campus. But for ancient times, they tried to get a copy of every book written. Think about that goal. Every book, they would even stop ships in the harbor. If a ship had books, they would take them. They would copy them, then they would give the copy back to the owner, or sometimes they just kept the original. They wanted it all. This was a time when scrolls were the books, papyrus scrolls. They were delicate, they needed care, they needed to be copied again and again, or they would just fall apart. The library had thousands of these scrolls, maybe hundreds of thousands. No one knows the exact number. But it was a lot more than any other place, and for a few centuries it worked. Scholars came. They studied, they wrote, they made maps, they figured out the size of the earth. They made breakthroughs in math and medicine. It was a true golden age for knowledge. But here's the thing, this golden age didn't last forever. Things change, empires fall. Priorities shift. The world around the library changed, and the library itself changed too. It slowly started to fade. It wasn't always the center of everything, it wasn't always getting new money and support. For people, sometimes forget this part. They only think about the big fire, the one where everything burned. But that's not really how it happened. The end was a slow process, a series of events. Not one single sudden disaster. And that's important to understand, because it makes the loss different. It makes it less like a sudden fatal blow, and more like a long, drawn-out illness. When people talk about the destruction of the Library of Alexandria, they usually mean a single, terrible fire. But the truth is much messier. It wasn't one event. There were many things that happened over hundreds of years. And each one contributed to its decline. It's like a building that slowly falls apart. Not one giant explosion. Let's start with Julius Caesar. This is the most famous story. Caesar was in Alexandria in 48 BC. He was fighting a war, his ships were in the harbor. He was in a tough spot, so he ordered his men to burn the Egyptian fleet. This fire spread. It reached the docks, and some say it reached the library. The story is that it burned down with all its scrolls. This sounds bad. It sounds like a huge loss, but historians don't think it was the main library, or that it was a total loss. What likely happened is that some warehouses on the docks caught fire. These warehouses probably held many scrolls that were either waiting to be cataloged or waiting to be shipped out. So yes, some scrolls were destroyed, maybe a lot of them. But it wasn't the entire Great Library. That was likely farther away from the harbor. And it was a sturdy stone building, not easily burned by a dock fire. So Caesar's fire was a blow. It was a loss. But it wasn't the end of the library, not by a long shot. People often confuse a loss of scrolls with the destruction of the entire institution. After Caesar, the library got new scrolls. Mark Antony supposedly gave Cleopatra a lot of books from the Library of Pergamum. This helped replace some of what was lost, so the library continued. It wasn't dead. Then we move forward in time. Centuries pass. Alexandria is still a city of learning. But it's changing. The Roman Empire takes over. Then Christianity rises. This is a big shift. The focus of learning starts to change. Pagan temples are closed. Pagan ideas are frowned upon. The Serapeum, the daughter library, was also a temple to the god Serapis. In 391 AD, a Christian mob destroyed the Serapeum. This was on the orders of Theophilus, the bishop of Alexandria. They tore down the temple. They probably destroyed the scrolls inside. This was a real destruction, and it was a major loss of book. So this was another blow, but again, it wasn't the entire Great Library. That main part might have already been less active, or already in decline. And this leads to another important point. The Great Library, the main one, probably just faded away. It didn't burn in one dramatic event. It just slowly stopped being used. Funding dried up, and scholars left. Scrolls weren't copied as much. It became less important. It probably just fell into disrepair. Its books scattered, or simply decayed over time. Papyrus doesn't last forever. Finally, there's the Arab conquest. This happened in 642 AD. The story here is the most dramatic. It says that the Arab general Amr ibn al-Az asked the Caliph Omar what to do with the library's books. Omar supposedly said, if these writings agree with the Book of God, they are useless and need not be preserved. If these writings disagree with the Book of God, they are sacrilegious and should be destroyed. So the books were used as fuel. They heated the city's bathhouses for months. This is a powerful story. It paints a picture of religious fanaticism destroying knowledge, but almost all historians today agree the story is made up. It appeared hundreds of years later. It was likely invented to make the Caliph Omar look bad, or to make Arabs look like destroyers of knowledge. There is no reliable evidence from the time. By 642 AD, the library was probably long gone, or what was left of it was very little. The great collection had already scattered, or decayed, so the Library of Alexandria didn't die in one fiery blaze. It died a slow death, a series of small wounds and neglect. It's not as romantic as one big fire, but it's more accurate, and this slow decline makes us rethink how overrated its destruction truly is. When we picture the Library of Alexandria, we often think of it holding all human knowledge. Every scientific discovery, every philosophical thought, every piece of literature. And when we imagine its destruction, we think of all that knowledge vanishing. It's a truly heartbreaking thought. But let's be realistic about what the library actually held, and what its limitations were. First, the library's collection was mostly Greek. Yes, they had some Egyptian texts. They had some Persian and Babylonian records. But the vast majority was Greek. This means much of the world's knowledge wasn't there at all. Knowledge from India, China, or other distant lands was probably very limited, so it wasn't truly all human knowledge. It was all Hellenistic knowledge, which is still impressive, but not everything. Second, the medium itself. Papyrus scrolls, these were not like modern books. They were very fragile. They didn't last long. They were easily damaged by moisture, insects, or just constant handling. To keep a text alive, it had to be copied over and over again, by hand. This was a huge job. It was expensive, it took a lot of time and effort. So, what happened? Only the most popular or important texts got copied regularly. Less popular works, they were copied less. Eventually, they would just naturally decay, or get lost in storage. This process of natural decay and loss was ongoing, long before any major fire. Think about it this way, if a text was only available in the Library of Alexandria, and it wasn't very popular, it was already on borrowed time. Even without a fire, it would eventually crumble away. The destruction didn't just happen at specific points in history. It was happening all the time, slowly, silently, through natural causes. Also, what kind of scholarship happened there? The scholars were brilliant, no doubt. They focused a lot on editing texts. They compared different versions of Homer's epics. They tried to figure out the correct version. This was vital work for preserving literature. But it wasn't always about making huge new scientific discoveries. Yes, people like Eratosthenes, who measured the Earth, and Euclid, who wrote about geometry, worked there. But much of the work was about maintaining, curating, and analyzing existing knowledge. Was all the knowledge in Alexandria unique? Probably not. The Hellenistic world was vast. There were other libraries, other private collections, scholars traveled, they brought copies of texts with them. So while Alexandria had the biggest collection, it likely wasn't the only place to find many of those texts. For example, Homer's poems were probably in many, many places across the Greek world. Losing Alexandria's version of Homer would be sad, but it wouldn't mean Homer was gone forever. The loss might have been more about specific commentaries, specific editions, or lesser-known works by minor authors. So, while the loss of any scrolls is regrettable, the idea that humanity lost a massive, unique, and irreplaceable body of foundational knowledge that couldn't be found anywhere else is probably overstated. The what was truly irreplaceable, probably the unique scholarship produced at Alexandria. The specific commentaries and insights of its scholars. The lesser-known works that had only one or two copies in the entire world. But was this enough to set back humanity by centuries? I don't think so. Much of the really important stuff, the core of Greek philosophy, science, and literature survived because it was popular. It was copied and spread, and it ended up in other places, places like Constantinople, monasteries in Europe, or later, the libraries of the Islamic world. The Library of Alexandria was a magnificent achievement, but its destruction was a complex, drawn-out process. And the true impact of that loss might not be as catastrophic as we imagine. It's easy to think that once the Library of Alexandria was gone, the world entered an intellectual dark age, that all knowledge was lost. But that's not how it happened. Alexandria was a bright star, yes. But it wasn't the only light. Knowledge was held and developed in many places, and when Alexandria declined, other centers of learning rose up. First, let's remember that even during Alexandria's peak, there were other important libraries. The Library of Pergamum, for example, in what is now Turkey. This was another huge library. It was a rival to Alexandria. They even competed for resources. Pergamum was famous for parchment. Papyrus came from Egypt. When Egypt stopped selling papyrus to Pergamum, they invented a new writing material. That shows how important knowledge was to them, and Pergamum had a vast collection too. So if Alexandria had a copy of a text, Pergamum might have had one too, or a different version. There were also many other smaller libraries. Temples had libraries. Private scholars had libraries. Each major city in the Hellenistic world probably had some kind of public or semi-public library. Athens still had its philosophical schools for a long time. They had their own collections of texts. So, knowledge was much more dispersed than we often think. It wasn't all in one basket. And as Alexandria slowly faded, other regions took up the torch of scholarship. The Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, was a huge preserver of Greek knowledge. They copied texts, they studied them, they kept the flame of classical learning alive for centuries, long after the Western Roman Empire fell. Many of the Greek texts we have today survived because Byzantine scholars copied them. Then there was the Islamic world. From the 8th century onwards, centers like Baghdad, Damascus, and later Cordoba became incredible hubs of learning. They collected, translated, and studied texts from Greece, Persia, and India. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad was an institution on par with, or even surpassing, the ancient Library of Alexandria in some ways. Islamic scholars translated countless Greek texts into Arabic. They didn't just copy them. They built on them. They made new discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. Much of what we know about ancient Greek science survived because it was first translated into Arabic. Then, much later, it was translated from Arabic into Latin, bringing it back to Europe. And let's not forget the monasteries in Europe. Even during the early Middle Ages, when Europe might seem dark, monks were copying texts. They were preserving knowledge. They might not have had the vast collections of Alexandria, but they saved what they could. They kept alive Latin texts, and slowly they started to rediscover Greek ones. The point is, intellectual life didn't stop because one library declined. Knowledge is not a fixed thing. It moves, it changes, it finds new homes. The destruction of Alexandria was a loss for Alexandria. It was a loss for a specific intellectual tradition, but it wasn't the end of learning for humanity. It was a shift. It was one phase ending and others beginning. To say humanity was set back hundreds of years assumes that all knowledge was held in one place. And that's just not true. It also assumes that all important knowledge was written down. And that's not true either. Much practical knowledge, much craft, much observation happened outside of formal libraries and scrolls. So, while we mourn the specific works that were lost from Alexandria, we also need to remember the incredible resilience of knowledge itself. It always finds a way to survive. It finds new people to cherish it. It finds new places to grow. The story of Alexandria is sad, but it's not the total catastrophe we sometimes make it out to be. The world kept learning. So if the Library of Alexandria didn't burn in one massive knowledge-ending fire, and if other places held on to knowledge, why do we still tell the story that way? Why does its destruction feel so important to us? I think there are a few reasons why we tend to overrate it. First, it's a dramatic story. A giant fire. All knowledge lost. It's simple. It's powerful. It's easy to understand. History is often messy and complicated, but a single tragic event is much easier to remember and retell. It fits a narrative. It fits the idea of a golden age suddenly ending. We like stories with clear heroes and villains, clear beginnings and endings. The slow, gradual decay of an institution over centuries isn't as gripping. It doesn't make for good movies or dramatic speeches. So we choose the more exciting version. Second, it serves as a powerful symbol. The Library of Alexandria represents everything good about learning, scholarship, and intellectual pursuit. Its destruction then becomes a symbol of the fragility of knowledge. It reminds us that knowledge can be lost. It can be suppressed, it can be destroyed. This is a very real fear, and the library story is a warning. It's a way to say, look what happens when we don't protect our books and our scholars. Even if the historical details are fuzzy, the symbolic power remains strong. Third, it fits the Dark Ages narrative. For a long time, historians in Europe viewed the period after the fall of Rome as a Dark Age, a time when civilization declined, when knowledge was lost. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria fits perfectly into this narrative. It's a convenient explanation for why Europe supposedly lost so much during that time. It implies a singular event that plunged the world into ignorance, but as we've seen, that's too simple. There were many reasons for the shifts in European society, and knowledge continued in other parts of the world. Fourth, there's a romantic idealization of the past. We tend to look back at ancient civilizations, especially the Greeks, with a certain awe. We see them as geniuses. We imagine them on the cusp of modern science. The idea that we lost some secret knowledge from Alexandria that would have given us flying cars centuries ago is very appealing. It's a what-if scenario that fuels our imagination. What if those books had survived? What incredible things would we know? This what-if makes the loss feel even greater. But it also probably inflates the actual content of the lost scrolls. Not every scroll was a groundbreaking scientific treatise. Many were literary works, commentaries, or less important documents. So, when we say the destruction of the Library of Alexandria is overrated, we're not saying it wasn't a loss. Any loss of knowledge is a bad thing. It was definitely a significant blow to the intellectual life of its time and place. It was a real tragedy for the scholars who worked there. And yes, some unique texts were probably lost forever. But the idea that it was a singular cataclysmic event that threw all of humanity into a centuries-long intellectual darkness is probably too strong. It minimizes the resilience of knowledge. It ignores the contributions of other cultures and other centers of learning. And it simplifies a long, complex historical process into a dramatic fire. The real story is more nuanced. It's about a grand institution that slowly faded, lost bits and pieces over time, and eventually gave way to new intellectual hubs. It's less dramatic, but it's more honest. And it shows that human curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge are much harder to kill than a building full of scrolls. They always find a way to resurface, adapt, and keep going.